You saw it. Not with your eyes, but with something far older. You pierced the veil, the illusion shattered, patterns exposed, the machinery of your mind grinding in full view. And then, silence. Not the comforting silence of peace, but the cavernous silence of something sacred having gone missing. The silence of a hollow cathedral. You expected angels. You found an echo. Why does awakening feel like extinction? We were told that truth would set us free, that awakening would light a fire in our bones, that clarity would elevate us. But here's the twist. The first thing truth burns is the fuel that once kept you going. Purpose collapses. Identity evaporates. Ambition melts. A 2023 study in transpersonal psychology revealed something chilling. 68% of spiritual seekers report a deep, meaning collapse immediately after awakening. That's not enlightenment, that's erosion, and yet, it's sacred. Carl Jung once said, "Individuation begins not with light, but with the dissolution of compasses. Your compass breaks first, north disappears. What you're experiencing isn't depression, it's decomposition, a sacred dismantling. At first, it's relief, like stepping out of a burning building into clean air. But then, that clean air begins to howl. This silence is not stillness. It's a void that roars. It devours your old ambitions, dissolves the fairy tales of love, success, even identity. And if you're a sensitive soul, a seeker, a healer, a poet of the invisible, this void cuts deeper. Where others find clarity, you find a question etched into your ribs. Why do I feel emptier, now that I finally see? Spiritual materialism sold us a dream, awakening as a luxury cruise to higher consciousness. But in truth, it's a shipwreck. And now, you're stranded in the in-between, no longer who you were, not yet who you are becoming. First comes the ecstasy, the flash of insight, the moment everything makes sense. Then comes the ache, where silence grows heavier and time stretches thin. And finally the ego creeps in, whispering that you've gone backward, that you've failed. But this isn't regression. It's the part of the journey where all your maps catch fire, where your soul dares you to walk blind, where your mind screams for meaning, and your heart begins to listen instead. And so begins the sacred undoing, not a quest toward the light, but a tender learning to see within the dark. This journey is not about illumination alone, but about embracing the shadows where true transformation breathes. As we step forward, Chapter 2 invites us deeper still, into the hollow where emptiness reveals itself, not as void, but as the hidden architecture of becoming. Here, the soul's alchemical fire quietly ignites, and what once felt like loss now births a sacred beginning. Jung's alchemical crucible, where the soul melts to rise. Beneath the stillness of your sacred exhaustion, something ancient begins to stir. Not a voice, not a thought, but a force, rising from the deep like floodwaters. Carl Jung warned of this hour. It arrives not in moments of glory, but in your unraveling, when the unconscious, long buried, rises to reclaim what awakening's fire could not touch. This is not healing. This is holy demolition. You are not being restored, you are being dissolved. Jung called it solutio, the stage where the soul demands its due, where the ashes left by Negredo, the ego's funeral pyre, are swept into the tides, where water follows fire, where emotion floods in as the final exorcism. Your tears, holy water. Your rage, sacred acid. The work you once avoided in the darkness now arrives with the power of a tsunami. Shadow fragments you never dared face now stand at your doorstep. This isn't psychology anymore. This is alchemy. You are the phoenix not yet aflame, but melting in its own storm, not dying, not reborn, just liquefying. Time distorts. A single day feels like an era. Your body aches. Old memories claw their way from forgotten corners. Childhood wounds, silent shames, they whisper now, louder than ever, and still you search for peace. But peace doesn't live here. What lives here is war. Individuation, Jung said, isn't about peace. It's about civil war, a battle between the collapsing ego and the rising self. While your outer world slows, the inner one turns molten. You wake at 3 a.m. with poems spilling from your chest. You can no longer tolerate small talk, the fake, the surface, the noise. You crave what's real, because you're becoming it. And here's the cruel miracle. Your years of striving, building, hustling, they didn't lead you to success. They led you here, to this sacred collapse. Jung called it enantiodromia, the law of reversal. What you ran toward now runs away. What you suppressed now rules your skies. The workaholic turns mystic. The people pleaser becomes hermit. The spiritual bypasser is forced to face their trauma. The psyche swings like a pendulum, not to punish, but to balance. You are not regressing. You are returning to the place you abandoned the moment you believed light meant safety. You stopped fleeing the dark, and that's where the self begins. In this crucible, the unconscious becomes known, not in words, but in symbols, synchronicities, and sudden storms of insight. Now, you stand at the edge once more, ready to enter the fire again, but this time not to scorch and erase the false, but to meet what rises, fierce and luminous, from the ash. Chapter 3 invites you to dive into the psychic tides, where the soul, stripped bare of all form, begins to hear its true name, not spoken by words, but vibrating deep through the bones of silence. The misdiagnosis of the void, breaking open, not down. They told you the void was depression. They mistook your stillness for laziness. They named your soul's quiet revolution a regression because they couldn't recognize what does not scream. But this isn't a breakdown. It's the breaking open. The house was rotting from the inside, and instead of rebuilding the foundation, they painted the walls. You knew better. You let it collapse. This is albedo, the whitening stage, not the light of celebration, but the blinding white of surrender, of nothingness, of the blank page after the storm has taken every word. It demands the one thing our culture fears most: patience with the unseen. While your soul reconfigures itself at quantum levels, the world chants mantras you can no longer chant back. Hustle harder, manifest more, vibrate higher. But truth, real rebirth, moves at the speed of geology, not TikTok. So you fall silent while others run louder into illusions, and they call your silence a sickness. You begin to wonder, maybe something is wrong with me, but what if nothing is wrong? What if this is what healing actually looks like? Not triumphant, not radiant, not viral, just still. The most terrifying thing, Jung said, is to accept oneself completely. But that is the crucible. And yet even here, temptations whisper. Call this emptiness enlightenment. Use detachment to dodge the real pain. Wrap yourself in robes of love and light while your shadow plans its quiet revolt. Culture tells 3 sacred lies to dismiss this void. You're lazy, but nature has winters, and caterpillars don't hustle in the cocoon. They dissolve, utterly. You're depressed, but depression drains life. This drains illusion. This isn't despair. It's the death of the unreal. You've lost your spark, but your old fire burned for validation. This new flame is deeper. It doesn't dance, it simmers. The caterpillar, mid-metamorphosis, appears like rot to the untrained eye. So do you. When old goals dissolve into fog, when fake smiles no longer stretch across your face, when silence feels more honest than any conversation. But this isn't decay. This is the embryology of your soul. One does not become light by imagining the sun. We become light by facing the dark and not turning away. Spiritual bypassing wears the same robes as awakening, but carries no scars, no wisdom, no truth. It preaches detachment, but fears being unseen. It weaponizes positivity, but runs from pain. It calls the cocoon a cage, because it doesn't understand birth. Let them misunderstand your stillness. Let them pathologize your pause. They haven't yet seen how quietly eternity rewrites itself. And when the light finally returns, not the harsh glare of false illumination, but the steady, sacred glow from within, you will no longer be who you once were. You may not even recognize yourself. Because in the next chapter, we fully enter the albedo's crucible, where the soul stops chasing answers and becomes the very question itself. Shadow work, the forbidden alchemy of darkness. There is a part of you so raw, so feral, so blisteringly alive. Your ego had no choice but to bury it beneath layers of masks and mantras. But your awakening, it handed that part a shovel. This isn't healing. This is a jailbreak. And the escapees are everything you've denied. You've crossed into the shadowlands now, where the soil is rich not from light, but from rot, from the decomposed ghosts of every version of you the world told you to silence. Jung never sold shadow work as self-help. It wasn't about feeling better. It was about becoming whole. He framed it as psychic archaeology, digging beneath the temple of your persona to unearth what you swore you'd never face. And what you find down there? The child you abandoned to be mature, the rebel you locked up to be holy, the beast you gagged to be acceptable. They're not gone. They've been pounding on the walls of your dreams, slipping through the cracks of your projections, spilling out in your rage and sadness and shame. The void wasn't empty, it was crowded with exiles. And here's the sacred truth. Your darkness isn't here to destroy you. It's your disowned power, waiting. But the modern world has tried to neuter it with myths. They told you shadow work was about fixing flaws. But your flaws are fragments of your forgotten kingdom. This isn't about correction. It's about reclamation. They said it's just about past trauma. But the shadow is not only wounded, it's wild. It carries the rage that could break systems, the lust that could birth galaxies, the pettiness that finally says, no more. And they promise that if you do the work, you'll become whole. But integration doesn't mean taming. It means inviting gods and monsters to the same dinner table and listening when they speak. Your psyche, clever as smoke, has already been trying to deliver these messages. That coworker you hate for no reason, a projection. That dream where you're being chased or standing naked in public, a summons. That sudden, explosive anger at something trivial, a flare from your shadow trying to surface. The brighter your persona, the darker the shadow it casts. That's not a curse, it's a map. So how do we listen? Write letters from the voice you're most ashamed of. Gaze into your own eyes in low light until your face starts to shift. Track synchronicities, not as signs of destiny, but as questions. What part of me am I refusing to see? Your consciousness is a double agent. It infiltrates your subconscious with dreams and déjà vu, with lovers who trigger you and strangers who unnerve you, just to bring you back to your truth. Shadow work isn't a descent, it's a retrieval. You are not falling apart, you are falling inward. And what you'll find there, in the darkest caves of your being, is not a demon. It is the fire you thought was lost, the wild, molten core of who you were before the world demanded you be tame, polite, unseen. In the next chapter, the alchemical fire rises once more, but this time not to consume, but to illuminate the radiant shape of your soul reborn, the emergence of the true self. There comes a morning when the silence shifts. It's not the hollowness of the void, nor the agonized hush of collapse, but a sacred stillness, a hush with a heartbeat, like the world is holding its breath before naming you something new. Your old ambitions lie scattered, rusted by the rain of your becoming. The hustle, the proving, the compulsive drive to matter, they've fallen away like old skin. And in their absence, something strange begins to pulse. It doesn't roar, it whispers, soft where gentle, yet undeniable. The true self has entered the room. No parade, no explosion, just a magnetic pull that subtly rearranges your life from the inside out. It doesn't burn, it resonates. It hums through your bones like a tuning fork struck by God. You've entered the rubedo phase. This is the alchemical red dawn. The place where your shadow and light made a quiet truce and something whole was born. Not perfect, not pure, but real. You no longer need to prove anything. You're no longer addicted to effort. Action doesn't feel like discipline. It feels like attraction. Even days that seem wasted begin to whisper clarity. And your body finally agrees with your choices. No more inner alarms, no more gut knots, just alignment. This is not motivation, this is soul movement, and it doesn't obey Newton's laws. It follows quantum rules. Ideas now arrive not from whiteboards, but from dreams. Strangers echo things you were just thinking, and somehow, even when you're doing nothing, you feel completely on course. This is the physics of the soul. Linear logic has surrendered to mystery. You've become both the path and the traveler. And now, reality begins to speak a new language. Dreams become messages. Water, snakes, lost objects, they aren't random. They're psychic memos. Synchronicities erupt with surgical precision, solving riddles you hadn't voiced aloud. Gut feelings emerge as sacred compasses, unmistakable, sovereign, beyond debate. The true self speaks not in words, but in symbols. This is what Jung called the symbolic life, a way of being where meaning isn't found, but felt. The hawk that circles overhead when you're doubting yourself. The exact song that plays when your courage falters. The sudden inner expansion when you say yes to the right thing. Soul tracking becomes your new ritual. You keep a journal, not of goals, but of omens. You listen to the way your body reacts before every decision. Expansion means yes. Contraction means fear. Numbness, that's a part of you still buried in shadow, waiting to be met. And when things feel murky, you don't panic. You speak aloud. Show me. And the first three coincidences that follow, they carry the answer. This is not manifestation. This is communion. You are no longer constructing a life. You are responding to a deeper script, written not by your ego, but by your essence. The symbolic life isn't something you schedule. It's something you remember. And you'll know you've remembered when reality begins to shimmer, not through control, but through conversation. The world no longer happens to you. It speaks through you. Its message simple, profound, and undeniable. Welcome back. The sacred power of saying no. There is a moment when your soul plants its heels deep into the earth and the word no becomes a sacred hymn, a quiet refusal louder than any shouted yes. Not rebellion, but reverence, for a life your ego fears to live, a life woven from whispers, from shadows made whole. The armor you bore, sharp and heavy, was never meant to shield you, but to make you translucent, to let the light through, to reveal the cracks where your deepest truth leaks out. Now begins the dance. Breathing the true self in a world still speaking ego's harsh tongue. A language loud and unyielding, where softness is mistaken for weakness. Your soul moves like a dowser's rod, searching beneath dry soil for hidden springs, for the underground rivers that sustain life unseen. Ego pushes, grinding, like boulders uphill, but soul catches the wave, effortless, alive, flowing with the tides of an ancient knowing. Desperation softens to devotion. I must, yielding to, I am called. Shouts dissolve into whispers, clarity born in sighs, not sirens. Betrayal melts into integrity, no becomes holy ground. Yet the awakened heart still falters, trapped by cunning shadows, chasing higher vibrations, a sly disguise of ego's hunger, a restless craving dressed as spiritual growth. But the soul does not vibrate. It resonates, deep and true, like a bell struck once, carrying sound through stillness. Seeking perfect clarity, but the true self scatters breadcrumbs, a dream's fragment, a stranger's word, the silent pull of sea glass on sand, tiny signs waiting for your attention. Beware the performative yes, stealing from moments your soul longs to live, a quiet theft in polite disguise, a concession that dilutes your sacred truth. Soul guidance whispers, never shouts. It tickles, a sudden urge to call an old friend. It nudges, a book opens to the perfect page. It haunts, images that linger, refusing to be forgotten. Jung reminds us, vision comes only when you meet your own heart's gaze, when you learn to listen beneath the noise. Before you speak, pause. Taste the truth on your tongue, feel it settle in your gut, hear its echo in your bones. Light a candle when you say no, whisper softly. This no makes space for my soul's yes. And when the old ego dresses you up, the perfect guru, the flawless partner, name the mask and step free. Living from the self, not the ego, is the quiet revolution your soul has waited for. A journey back to the sacred silence within, where true life begins, and where your yes sings loudest when held in the sanctuary of your no. Remember, every sacred no is a gatekeeper, guarding the temple of your essence, ensuring that what flows through is pure, undiluted, and alive. It is the tender boundary where self-respect blooms, a sanctuary for your energy, a declaration that your life belongs to you, not the endless demands of a distracted world. Saying no is not a closing of doors, but an opening, a clearing in the forest, where the wild light streams in and nourishes your roots, reminding you that every refusal is a yes to your deepest truth. Practical signs of transition. One morning, you find yourself painting in silence. No audience, no likes, no story to tell. Just colors meeting canvas in a quiet, unspoken communion. This is not procrastination. This is evolution, raw and unfiltered, creating for creation's sacred pulse alone. The crucible's first law whispers, true embodiment begins here, in these almost invisible rebellions. Those tiny moments when your soul quietly overrides a lifetime of conditioning. The world won't cheer, your bank account may tremble, but something ancient within finally exhales, a breath held since the dawn of your becoming. Jung's voice echoes softly. The fiercest storms once weathered leave behind a calm deeper than any calm before. You'll know transition is breathing new air when applause becomes nothing but background noise. Not rejection, just a quiet irrelevance. When peace rises like power, not a pause in action, but sovereignty reclaimed. When tiny nudges outweigh rigid blueprints, not chaos, but the architecture of higher order. Like a tree, choosing deep roots over fleeting blossoms, you begin to prioritize the unseen, the unspoken, the quiet pulse beneath the surface. Creating without witnesses, your art no longer a cry for approval, but a love letter written to existence itself. The audience disappears, and with it, the weight of imagined critics. The 3 a.m. test whispers, if no one ever saw this, would it still matter to your bones? Projects shift, aging like wine, not spoiling like milk, forgotten in a rush. Peace becomes your ultimate flex, choosing stillness over the relentless grind of productivity cults. You cancel important meetings to watch clouds drift lazily by. Wear mediocre clothes that feel like second skin, soft and true. Let emails marinate while you soak deep into existence itself. Jung's wisdom remains. Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. The nudge navigation system is alive. When torn between roads, ask yourself, which path feels like coming home? For every rigid goal, craft 3 fluid alternatives. Instead of deadlines, follow the story's breath. Log the absurd, meaningful accidents, those wild synchronicities that guide with perfect, unexplainable precision. Decision-making flows now, like water finding its own level, soft, sure, and effortless. Transition reveals itself not in grand gestures, but in subtle realignments. A morning spent brewing tea with reverence, a pause to feel the earth beneath your feet, a choice to listen rather than react. You learn to honor the intervals, those sacred pauses where new worlds gestate, where your soul stitches old wounds into new wisdom. This journey demands patience, not as a burden, but as a profound teacher. For rushing risks missing the whisper of your own becoming. You begin to understand that transition is never linear. It folds back upon itself, circling like a spiral dance of release and return, each loop deeper than the last, inviting you to shed old skins again and again, softening your edges to a new shape of truth. And so, you step lightly, with a heart wide open, aware that this transformation is less a destination and more a living, breathing unfolding. A return not to perfection, but to presence. A presence that listens more than it speaks, that pauses long enough to feel the sacred pulse beneath chaos. And as the old maps burn, a quieter voice begins to rise. In the next chapter, we meet that voice fully, the soul's steady whisper in the noise of urgency, reminding us that healing is not on a clock and that becoming cannot be rushed. We turn now toward the invitation that demands the deepest faith of all, to trust the process, especially when nothing makes sense. The call to trust the process. Your ego screams like a storm, telling you you're falling behind, but your soul, quieter, whispers instead, you are exactly on time. This isn't a slogan on a wall. This is initiation through stillness, where doing nothing becomes the bravest act of all. The Love Lab's ultimate test unfolds, carrying you gently from Chapter 8's bond without masks to the final exam of relationships, trusting the limbo itself. No more spiritual shortcuts, no forcing timelines, just the raw, unfiltered process of becoming, a slow dance with uncertainty. All the greatest problems of life, Jung reminds us, are fundamentally insoluble. They cannot be solved, only outgrown. In this in-between space, you claim your sacred rights, the freedom to not know, immunity from the hurry of others, sovereignty over your own pace. You become like a snake mid-molt, too tender for the old skin, too vulnerable for the new. Soul surgery begins, cutting through the lies that hijack trust. Stagnation does not mean failure. The deepest alchemy happens in stillness. Your chrysalis, unseen, yet bursting with life. Clarity does not strike instantly. The soul moves in deep time. Your awakening began lifetimes ago, long before you noticed. You are not wasting potential. What your ego calls wasted days, your soul knows as compost, the fertile decay from which new growth bursts. When panic rises like tidal waves, reach for the stillness survival kit. Write down ego's frantic questions. When will you pee? Then burn the paper. Release the weight of urgency. Place your hands on heart and belly. Whisper, I honor my perfect timing. Journal love letters to your future self, thanking yourself for this sacred pause. Jung's insight lingers. Creation is born not from intellect, but from the play instinct. Learn to read the difference. Initiation versus dysfunction. True initiation feels expansive, even through pain, curious, even in the unknown, rooted, even when action pauses. Dysfunction feels contracted, and fearful, desperate for quick fixes, untethered from self. Like distinguishing pregnancy from illness. Both bring discomfort, but only one creates life. This liminal space, where nothing seems settled, is not a void, but a fertile ground. Here, your soul builds resilience, like roots growing deeper beneath winter's freeze, invisible but vital. Trust that the unseen currents beneath the surface are shaping a vessel stronger than before. Your impatience is the ego's plea for control, but surrender is the soul's invitation to flow. To trust the process is to trust yourself, even when the path is shrouded, even when the next step cannot yet be seen. It is a vow to honor the unseen work within, to recognize that the most profound transformations are never hurried, only allowed. The call to trust is a call to courage, the courage to sit with uncertainty, to hold space for your becoming, and to know without needing proof that you are exactly where you need to be. And once you begin to trust, another invitation arrives, quieter still, but no less sacred. Not to do, not to fix, but to let go. In the next chapter, we step into this mystery, where surrender is not weakness, but the highest expression of wisdom, where the soul exhales and life rushes in. The power of surrender, embracing the unknown. There is a moment when the tight grip loosens. Fingers unclenching, the warrior lowers their sword. This is not defeat, but the sacred art of surrender, a paradox where strength blooms not from control, but from the courage to release the illusion of holding on. Surrender is not giving up. It is opening, wide and raw, to the vast mysterious space beyond your knowing, where fear and freedom dance in silent rhythm. Here, the soul whispers truths that ego cannot hear. Let go, not to fall, but to rise in ways unseen. The unknown is not a void, it is fertile ground, dark soil rich with possibility, where seeds of transformation take root in silence. You cannot force growth, you cannot hurry the bloom. Surrender invites you to become the gardener, who trusts the unseen rhythms of rain, sun, and shadow. Resistance is the storm that breaks branches, but surrender is the river carving new canyons, patient, persistent, inevitable. It is the alchemy of healing, where brokenness is softened, reshaped, and finally transformed into wisdom's delicate wings. In surrender, the soul reclaims its sovereignty, not through rigid mastery, but through the fluid grace of yielding. It is a dance with uncertainty, a dialogue between I will and I must trust. Each step forward is a step into mystery, where control dissolves into flow, and flow becomes the pulse of true freedom. This power moves quietly, not the loud shout of ego's demands, but the gentle hum beneath the chaos. It is the breath before the storm, the pause where creation gathers strength, the silence from which new life emerges. Surrender asks you to release the need for certainty, to accept that your story is not a script to follow, but an evolving poem written by the hand of the divine. When you stop grasping for answers, you make space for miracles, small, unexpected blessings that rewrite your understanding of possibility. Healing begins not in fixing, but in allowing, not in pushing forward, but in leaning back into the arms of trust. The wounds you carry do not disappear with effort, they soften with presence. Surrender is presence. An open heart willing to feel, to hold, to rest in the tension between pain and peace. Transformation thrives in this sacred space, where ego's grasp loosens and soul's wings unfold. Here, you are invited to be both the storm and the calm, the question and the answer, the seeker and the sanctuary. Jung's wisdom echoes once more. To surrender is to have faith in the unknown path, to walk it not with trembling fear, but with the steady pulse of a soul awakening. Let surrender be your revolution. Not a fall into nothingness, but a rise into everything you were always meant to become. Open your hands, release the illusion of control, Step into the wild unknown and discover the infinite life waiting in the sacred surrender of your becoming. And now, with hands emptied, heart open, and the fire of remembrance still warm in your chest, you're ready for the final invitation. Final invitation. This is where your story turns sacred, not because it dazzles, but because it is yours. That vast void you crossed, it left invisible ink etched into your bones. Now it's time to write in a language only the lost can read. After decoding life's whispers and synchronicities, you speak your soul's mother tongue fluently. What once seemed random suffering now reveals itself as curriculum. What felt like detours were the only true path home. The fiercest storms you've weathered, once overcome, leave behind a deep calm, a steady security, like the earth after a long rain. Your awakening calls you threefold: to bear witness, where scars become sacred maps, to unite shadow and light in quiet harmony, to leave a legacy through the silent power of simply living true. Like a forest that offers no sermons, yet changes the very air with its presence. In a world suffocating on curated highlights, your raw, unfiltered story is the oxygen for the seeker who fears failure, for the empath who feels broken, for the warrior exhausted by endless battle. True self-love is no chant or mirror phrase. It is making space at the table for your darkness, forgiving your past survival, listening with open arms to the voices you once cast away. The greatest fear is not the darkness, but the courage to accept yourself wholly. Begin now the sacred ripple. Reveal one unpolished truth each week. Perhaps, sometimes I miss my addiction. It felt like home. Move silently through crowds, imagining your healed wounds as gentle beacons lighting others' pain. Write letters from your future self to souls you may never meet, yet who will feel your presence, whole and bright. Consciousness is a tuning fork, and you, a vibration awakening others' resonance. The world does not need your enlightenment. It needs your lived humanity, the cracks where the light slips in. This is no farewell. It is the first true hello to the life waiting for the real you all along. Your next chapter begins where spiritual scripts end, in the wild, uncharted territory of a soul fully owned. Here, the sacred and the mundane merge, where doing dishes is prayer, and walking barefoot is a rite of passage, where the quiet moments, the breath before speech, the pause before action, become your sanctuary. This journey is not a peak to conquer, but a river to flow within, carving new valleys of being with each fearless step. So stand now at the threshold, not with hesitation, but with fierce grace, ready to live the story only you can tell, raw and radiant, imperfect and whole.